October 1st, 1988. The Plaza Hotel, New York City. Workers in coveralls storm into the Oak Room, a space unchanged for 80 years. They're ripping century-old brass fixtures from mahogany walls, tearing down panels that witness negotiations that changed history, all on orders from the new owner. 2 people didn't die here that day. Something far greater did. The soul of an entire institution, a culture built by generations, the irreplaceable character that made the Plaza more than just another luxury address. And the man who killed it? He's still celebrated as a business genius. This is the story the movies never show you, the dark truth behind America's most famous hotel. And by the end, you'll question everything you thought you knew about success, legacy, and what we're really willing to sacrifice for profit. You've seen the Plaza Hotel in dozens of films. Home Alone 2, The Great Gatsby, North by Northwest. Every romantic comedy set in New York eventually points its cameras at that iconic limestone facade. But here's what Hollywood never tells you. The Plaza wasn't just a hotel where rich people stayed temporarily. People lived there permanently, like entire lives from birth to death inside those walls. Wealthy widows moved in after their husbands died. Retired industrialists took suites and never left. Eccentric heiresses chose the Plaza over family mansions. Some families occupied the same suites for generations, passing them down like inherited property. Children grew up in these rooms. They learned to walk in hallways designed for visiting dignitaries. They knew the doormen by name. The doormen knew their children, then their grandchildren. This created something incredibly rare in New York City, a community built on continuity rather than transaction. A village inside a building where neighbors looked out for each other, where staff became extended family, where the longest-serving employees watched generations grow up within these walls. And this is where I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to reveal about this hidden world, the secret society that existed behind the public grandeur, is something that connects directly to a deep investigation I'm conducting right now about another American institution that was systematically destroyed from the inside. The parallels are chilling. If you want to catch that story the moment it drops, hit subscribe, because these patterns of institutional destruction, they're everywhere, hiding in plain sight. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Kay Thompson understood this secret world when she created Eloise, the children's book about a girl who lives at the Plaza. It became beloved because it revealed what permanent residents already knew. Living at the Plaza meant belonging to something bigger than yourself. But there was an even darker secret hiding in plain sight. The Oak Room, one of the Plaza's most famous spaces, didn't admit women until 1969. For 62 years, it remained a male sanctuary where deals were made without feminine distraction. Dark wood paneling, murals depicting outdoor scenes, heavy furniture meant for serious men conducting serious business. The segregation seems absurd now. Back then, it seemed refined, natural. Even progressive people accepted it. It took a lawsuit from the National Organization for Women to break that tradition. Protests, complaints. Eventually, the hotel surrendered. Some male patrons grumbled, most adapted quickly. But here's the thing that should terrify you. Traditions that feel eternal, that seem like they've always existed and always will, they can vanish in an afternoon when the right pressure or the wrong owner comes along. The Palm Court was different. This was where power wore a different face. Afternoon tea arrived precisely at 4 p.m. beneath a vaulted ceiling of stained glass. The light filtering through that glass became famous. Photographers sought it for decades. But what happened beneath that beautiful light, that's where the real power played out. Women met there to exchange information that couldn't be shared elsewhere. Engagements were announced over tea before appearing in newspapers. Divorces were whispered about while spreading marmalade. Business deals were discussed in language coded to exclude eavesdroppers. The Palm Court functioned as an intelligence exchange, where reputation was the currency. One wrong word at afternoon tea could destroy a family's social standing. One right introduction could change your entire life trajectory. This was the Plaza's real magic. Not the chandeliers or the marble, the networks, the access, the sense that you were at the center of something that mattered. And then, in 1943, something shifted. Conrad Hilton bought the plaza. He approached the acquisition as a business optimization problem. Efficiency increased, character decreased. It was subtle at first, just small changes here and there. Cost reductions disguised as modernization, staff cuts justified by new management systems. The permanent residents noticed first. Staff turnover accelerated. Familiar faces disappeared without explanation. New employees didn't know the residents' names or preferences. The hotel started feeling less like a home and more like a business that happened to contain their apartments. Then came Westin hotels, more corporate transitions, more subtle erosions. Each change individually seemed reasonable, but collectively, they were stripping away something essential. By the 1980s, the plaza had become a trophy property, the most famous hotel in America, available to whoever could write the largest check. And in 1986, preservationists saw the danger coming. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission designated key interior spaces as landmarks: the Palm Court with its famous ceiling, the Oak Room with its irreplaceable woodwork, the Grand Ballroom where Capote had thrown his legendary party. These spaces couldn't be altered without commission approval. It seemed like a victory, legal protection for irreplaceable craftsmanship. But here's what nobody understood at the time. Landmark status had limits. It protected physical spaces from demolition. It couldn't protect culture. It couldn't prevent new owners from firing longtime staff, eliminating services, destroying the community that made permanent residents feel at home. You could hollow out everything that made the plaza more than just a beautiful building, while technically complying with landmark regulations. The building went up for sale in 1988. Multiple buyers expressed interest. The asking price exceeded $400 million. And one buyer in particular saw something nobody else did. Not an institution to preserve, not a community to protect. He saw an ATM machine wrapped in landmark-protected limestone. His name was Donald Trump. And what he did next would prove that you can kill something precious without ever laying a hand on the physical structure. That sometimes the most devastating destruction is the kind that leaves the building standing. March 1988. Donald Trump held a press conference that made headlines across America. He just purchased the Plaza Hotel for $407.5 million, a record-breaking price for a single hotel property. He stood in front of cameras and declared he would restore the plaza to its original grandeur, make it the greatest hotel in the world. The promises sounded magnificent. The media ate it up. Trump, the master deal maker, saves an American icon. But here's what the press conference didn't mention. Trump borrowed almost the entire purchase price, junk bonds with interest rates exceeding 14%. Let me put that in perspective. The debt service alone, just the interest payments, would require enormous revenue just to break even. The numbers only worked if the hotel's income increased dramatically and immediately. Financial analysts quietly questioned whether that was even possible. Trump dismissed their concerns with characteristic confidence. Then he made a move that should have been a massive red flag, but somehow the media spun it as charming. He installed his wife, Ivana, as president of the plaza. Her official salary? $1 per year, plus all the dresses she could buy. The arrangement made great publicity. Behind the scenes, it was a warning sign of the chaos to come. And the longtime staff, people who'd worked at the plaza for decades, who'd served tea to visiting royalty, who knew every permanent resident by name, they watched this surface arrive with justified terror. The changes began within weeks, and they were brutal. Trump ordered immediate cost reductions. He viewed the plaza's staffing levels as excessive. Positions were eliminated, departments were consolidated, employees who'd worked at the hotel for decades received termination notices. But here's what you have to understand. When you fire someone who's worked at the plaza for 30 years, you're not just losing an employee, you're losing institutional memory. That person knew which permanent resident needed their newspaper delivered to the left side of their door, not the right. They knew that Mrs. Henderson in Suite 812 had been allergic to down pillows since 1956. They knew the exact pressure required to polish the brass fixtures without damaging them. They knew which floorboard in the palm court creaked and how to avoid it during service. All that knowledge, accumulated over decades, passed down through informal apprenticeships, walked out the door with them, and it was never replaced. The service reductions followed quickly. Amenities that guests expected disappeared or diminished. The famous attention to detail that distinguished the plaza from competitors became harder to maintain with fewer staff covering more responsibilities. Long-term guests noticed immediately. First-time visitors had nothing to compare against. They saw luxury. Regulars saw decline. But Trump wasn't finished, not even close. He announced plans to convert portions of the hotel into condominiums. The guest rooms on upper floors would become private apartments. Each unit would sell for millions. The conversions would generate enormous one-time revenue. They would also permanently reduce the hotel's room inventory. 800 rooms would become fewer than 500. The plaza would become smaller as a hotel while Trump extracted capital from it. The permanent residents, the people who'd lived at the plaza for decades, who'd raised children in these suites, who'd formed a community within these walls, they recognized the threat immediately. If hotel rooms were becoming condominiums, their apartments might be next. Their rent-controlled leases protected them from eviction, but constant pressure could make life unbearable. This is an old trick. You can't force protected tenants out legally, so you make their lives so miserable they leave voluntarily. The residents organized. They hired lawyers. They filed complaints about every maintenance issue. They documented building code violations. They challenged proposed changes through every available channel. Trump's representatives pushed back aggressively. The relationship between ownership and residents became openly hostile. Threatening letters, legal harassment, accidental service disruptions to rent-controlled apartments. Some residents had lived at the plaza since the 1940s. They'd survived previous ownership changes, but they'd never experienced anything like this. Meanwhile, the condominium conversions proceeded. Construction crews moved through the building. Units were reconfigured and upgraded. Sales offices opened. Wealthy buyers lined up for plaza addresses. Some units sold for over $10 million. The revenue helped service that crushing debt Trump had taken on. But each sale meant fewer hotel rooms generating ongoing income. Trump was eating the seed corn. And then there was the staff, the people who remained after the mass firings. Former employees later described an atmosphere of constant fear and pressure. Nothing was ever good enough. Costs had to decrease further. Service standards were impossible to maintain with available resources. The gap between what ownership demanded and what employees could actually deliver grew wider every day. Ivana managed the daily operations with aggressive intensity. Staff members described her as demanding, unpredictable, sometimes cruel. The plaza had always expected excellence, but this was different. This was chaos masquerading as management. But wait, because while all this was happening inside the plaza, an even more absurd drama was playing out across the street. Leona Helmsley owned the Park Lane Hotel directly opposite the plaza, and Helmsley and Trump absolutely despised each other. Their feud played out in tabloid headlines and legal filings. Helmsley would take out full-page ads mocking Trump. Trump would fire back in interviews. It was petty, it was public, and it was completely distracting from the real problem. The plaza was drowning in debt. And then Helmsley got convicted of tax evasion in 1989. Her famous declaration, "Only the little people pay taxes," became national news. She went to prison. The conviction removed one rival, but it didn't solve Trump's fundamental problem. The math wasn't working. By 1990, the plaza owed approximately $250 million to bondholders. The interest payments exceeded what the property could generate. Trump had loaded the plaza with unsustainable debt to finance his purchase. Now the mathematics were collapsing. No amount of cost-cutting could close the gap between revenue and obligations. You can fire staff, you can reduce service, but you can't magic money into existence when the debt burden is crushing. And here's the truly damning part. This wasn't just happening at the plaza. Trump's other properties were failing simultaneously. His casinos in Atlantic City struggled with similar debt burdens. His Trump shuttle airline hemorrhaged money. His yacht and mansions required expensive maintenance while generating no income. The empire built on borrowed money was coming apart across multiple fronts. And the people paying the price? The bondholders who'd lent him money. the employees who lost their jobs, the permanent residents whose community was being destroyed. The Plaza's employees watched the deterioration with helpless frustration. They understood exactly what was happening. They saw the deferred maintenance accumulating. They knew which corners were being cut. They worried about their jobs with very good reason. Many had spent their entire careers at the hotel. They had nowhere else to go. The skills they developed, the institutional knowledge, the refined service standards, those weren't things you could easily transfer to another property. The permanent residents experienced the decline in their daily lives. Service calls went unanswered for longer. Repairs took weeks instead of days. The staff who remained seemed exhausted and demoralized. The community feeling that had made Plaza living special, the sense that you belonged to something, that you were cared for, that disappeared entirely. Residents who could afford to leave began considering alternatives, but leaving meant abandoning decades of accumulated life. It meant admitting defeat. It meant accepting that the institution they'd called home was dying. And through all of this, through the firings, the declining service, the hostile relationship with residents, the mounting debt, Trump's public statements bore absolutely no relationship to internal reality. He continued declaring the Plaza successful while his representatives negotiated with creditors behind closed doors. He announced expansion plans while cutting staff. He claimed personal wealth while his properties teetered toward bankruptcy. The disconnect between his public pronouncements and the actual evidence was total, but somehow the media kept covering his statements as if they were credible. Former employees later described the management atmosphere as utterly chaotic. Decisions came from the top without consultation. Expertise was ignored. Long-term thinking was impossible because short-term survival consumed all attention. The institutional culture that had developed over 80 years, the sense that the Plaza was special, that it mattered, that preserving its standards was a responsibility, all of that was being actively destroyed. And here's what's truly chilling. This would prove to be Trump's pattern across his entire business career. Acquire assets with borrowed money, extract value quickly, let the debt crush what remains, move on to the next deal while creditors fight over scraps. The Plaza was one of many casualties, but because it was so famous, because it meant so much to so many people, its destruction was particularly visible, particularly painful. By 1992, the situation was terminal. The Plaza couldn't service its debt. Trump couldn't inject additional capital. The bondholders who had financed his purchase wanted their money back. Something had to give. The question was, what would Trump sacrifice and what would he manage to keep? Because here's the thing about Trump, and this is something that would define his entire career. He's a master at failing upward, at finding ways to lose other people's money while somehow protecting himself. The answer would reveal his priorities with brutal clarity, and what happened next would prove that you can devastate an institution, cost your creditors hundreds of millions of dollars, destroy people's livelihoods and homes, and somehow emerge with your reputation largely intact. But the damage, the real damage to the Plaza, that was already done. November 1992, Donald Trump surrendered control of the Plaza Hotel to his creditors. The restructuring agreement told the story of his failure in precise numbers. Bondholders who had financed his purchase received 49% ownership. Trump kept 49%, but lost management authority. Citibank and other lenders took the remaining stake. Trump's grand promises had collapsed into bankruptcy paperwork. But here's the part that should make your blood boil. The debt restructuring erased hundreds of millions in obligations. Bondholders who had expected full repayment received equity in a troubled property instead. Their original investments were worth a fraction of face value. The people who had lent Trump money paid for his miscalculation. This pattern would repeat throughout his entire business career. Borrow heavily, fail spectacularly, let creditors absorb losses. And somehow, Trump emerged from this catastrophic failure with his celebrity status intact. He'd cost his creditors hundreds of millions of dollars. He'd damaged an American landmark. He'd destroyed people's livelihoods. Yet he retained his minority ownership stake and his reputation as a deal-maker. The ability to fail upward would become his defining characteristic. But the Plaza? The actual building and the people whose lives revolved around it? Let's talk about what Trump's 4 years of active management left behind. The damage was visible everywhere if you knew where to look. Deferred maintenance had accumulated throughout the building. Systems that required regular attention had been neglected. The famous fixtures showed wear that proper care would have prevented. And the staff who knew how to maintain these irreplaceable elements, they'd been fired. Their expertise had walked out with them. The workforce had been gutted systematically. Positions eliminated during cost-cutting drives were never restored. Remaining employees covered responsibilities formerly divided among multiple people. Service quality suffered inevitably. But here's what you really need to understand. The institutional memory that distinguished the Plaza from every other luxury hotel, that was gone. Completely. Irreversibly. You can't rebuild that. You can hire new staff, you can implement training programs, but you can't transfer the accumulated wisdom that develops only through decades of practice. You can't recreate the sense of ownership and pride that comes from spending your entire career in one place, learning from the people who came before you. That knowledge, that culture, it's like an old-growth forest. Once you clear-cut it, you can plant new trees, but you'll never get that forest back, not in our lifetimes. The permanent residents had experienced years of hostile management. Some had surrendered and moved out. Others remained, protected by rent stabilization laws, living behind barricades of legal protections. But the community that defined Plaza residential life, that was dead. These weren't neighbors anymore. They were survivors of a siege, traumatized and isolated. And the condominium conversions, those had permanently altered the building's character. 800 hotel rooms had become fewer than 500. The Plaza was now primarily a condominium building with a hotel component. This inversion of purpose contradicted everything Harry Black, the man who built the Plaza, had envisioned. He built a great hotel. Trump converted it into an apartment building with a famous lobby. Now here's where the story gets even more absurd, because Trump's failure opened the door to an ownership carousel that continues to this day. CDL Hotels of Singapore acquired controlling interest in 1995 for approximately $325 million. They brought international capital and professional management. They invested in restoration work, addressed some of the deferred maintenance Trump had ignored. But the fundamental changes from the condominium conversions remained permanent. The Plaza couldn't become what it had been before 1988. Then Fairmont Hotels took over management in 1999. They brought expertise in operating luxury properties. Things stabilized somewhat, but the ownership structure remained complicated. Trump still held his minority stake, which limited what anyone could accomplish. In 2004, Elad Properties, an Israeli development company, acquired the Plaza for $675 million. And guess what they announced? More condominium conversions. Even more hotel rooms would become private apartments. The pattern Trump established would continue under new ownership. The hotel component would shrink further. 800 rooms became 500, then eventually fewer than 280. Preservationists fought the proposed changes. They argued that further conversions would fundamentally alter the Plaza's character. The landmark designations protected architectural features but didn't prevent conversion of hotel rooms to residential use. The conversions proceeded. More floors became condominiums. Wealthy buyers paid extraordinary sums for Plaza addresses. Individual units sold for $30 million or more. A penthouse triplex eventually sold for over $50 million. Think about that. A single apartment, $50 million. The Plaza's famous name commanded premium prices regardless of what happened to the hotel. But here's where it gets truly dystopian. Some of these ultra-luxury condominiums sit empty for most of the year. Billionaires from around the world own them as investments or occasional residences. They appear briefly, then vanish to other properties in other cities. They have no connection to Plaza history. They didn't buy membership in a community. They bought addresses, trophy properties, tax advantages. The building that had once housed a vibrant community where children grew up, where elderly residents spent their final years surrounded by neighbors who cared about them. That building now contains empty luxury apartments owned by people who might visit once a year. In 2012, the ownership structure shifted again.
Sahara India Pariwar, an Indian conglomerate, acquired a controlling stake for approximately $570 million. The purchase attracted immediate scrutiny because Sahara's chairman faced legal troubles in India. Securities regulators questioned the company's financing practices, and eventually he went to jail. The chairman of the company that owned America's most famous hotel was literally in prison in India. The Plaza's fate depended on legal proceedings in courts thousands of miles away. Then came Qatar Hospitality in 2018. The hotel investment arm of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund acquired the Plaza for reportedly around $600 million. Then came Cascawala, another major financial player. The stabilizer was France. Accor Hotels of France took over management in 2018. They brought expertise in operating luxury properties. Things stabilized somewhat, but the ownership structure remained complicated. Trump still held his minority stake, which limited what anyone could accomplish.
A Middle Eastern government now owns America's most famous hotel. The acquisition completed the Plaza's transformation into a global investment vehicle, bought and sold by sovereign wealth funds and international conglomerates who view it purely as an asset on a balance sheet. And through all these ownership changes, through all the promises and restructurings and management transitions, what happened to the people? The permanent residential community essentially vanished. A handful of rent-stabilized tenants remain in apartments surrounded by multi-million-dollar condominiums. The neighbors they knew for decades have died or departed. The staff who recognized them have been replaced repeatedly. They live in a building that contains their homes but no longer feels like their community. The workforce operates under completely different conditions than their predecessors experienced. Corporate management systems have replaced informal institutional culture. Training programs standardize service rather than preserving distinctive traditions. Labor disputes have marked recent years. Union workers have struck over wages and working conditions. The strikes are symptoms of deeper changes no contract negotiation can address. The Plaza employs professional hospitality workers. It no longer cultivates Plaza people who spend entire careers within its walls. Now, you might be thinking, but the building still stands, right? The Palm Court still serves afternoon tea, the Oak Room's paneling survived, the Grand Ballroom hosts events. And you'd be right. The landmark protections worked. The physical spaces were preserved. But here's the question nobody wants to confront. What exactly did we preserve? Walk into the Plaza today and you can still feel something. The lobby retains its scale and grandeur. Marble columns rise toward decorated ceilings. Crystal chandeliers scatter light across polished floors. First-time visitors experience the impact Harry Black intended when he commissioned this building in 1905. The Palm Court continues serving afternoon tea beneath the famous stained glass ceiling. People still dress for the occasion. They still photograph themselves in this setting. The ritual remains recognizable. But the context? That's completely transformed. The afternoon tea that once functioned as an intelligence exchange, where reputations were made and destroyed, where business was conducted in coded language, where a community gathered daily, that's gone. Now it's a tourist attraction, an Instagram opportunity. People photograph the beautiful space without understanding what it meant. They admire the architecture without knowing the lives that unfolded beneath that ceiling.
The guest experience meets contemporary luxury standards. The reduced room count allows for larger accommodations. Modern amenities have been installed throughout. The technology works. The service is professional. Guests who judge hotels by contemporary measures find the Plaza satisfactory. Those seeking connection to history find something more complicated. Because here's the brutal truth. We saved the shell and lost the soul. The movies and TV shows keep filming there. Production companies pay substantial fees to use the famous setting. The Plaza plays itself in romantic comedies and prestige dramas. Each appearance reinforces the brand. But the image has become more durable than the institution. Harry Black, the man who built the Plaza, would recognize the building he created. The facade remains largely unchanged. The landmark protections preserved the architectural features he specified. The green copper roof still marks the corner of Fifth Avenue and Central Park South. The physical monument survived everything that followed his death. But would Black recognize what the building has become? He built a great hotel. He created a destination where American society gathered and performed, where communities formed, where lives unfolded. That living institution has been hollowed out. The beautiful shell remains. And here's the bitter irony that connects everything. Harry Black's personal fate mirrors his creation's tragedy. He built monuments across America. His company constructed skyscrapers that transformed city skylines. He achieved extraordinary success by any measure. Then the crash of 1929 destroyed him. On July 19, 1930, Harry Black took his own life. He was 67 years old. The man who built the plaza died broken and bankrupt. The pattern repeats throughout this story. Builders create, inheritors and successors consume. The buildings outlast everyone. Black built a monument designed to endure. It did, but not in the way he intended. So what do we do with this? How do we think about preservation when the law protects stones but not souls? When landmark designation saves architecture but allows culture to die? The plaza's protected spaces remain largely intact. Preservationists who fought for landmark designation accomplished something real. These physical achievements matter. They represent victories won through decades of advocacy. But physical preservation without cultural preservation produces museums rather than living institutions. The plaza's landmark spaces are beautiful. They're also increasingly disconnected from the building's original purpose. Tourists photograph the Palm Court without understanding what afternoon tea once meant. They admire the Oak Room without knowing the history those walls witnessed. The spaces survive as aesthetic experiences rather than social ones.
And maybe, that's actually revealing something we don't want to admit about how preservation works in America. We're really good at saving pretty things. We're terrible at preserving the meaning behind them. We can designate a landmark. We can regulate alterations. We can require owners to maintain physical features. But we can't mandate stewardship. We can't require owners to love what they possess. We can't force someone to prioritize an institution's living culture over their return on investment. The law gives us tools to save buildings. It gives us almost nothing to save what makes those buildings matter. So here's the question I want you to sit with, and I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just about the plaza. This is about every institution we claim to value. Can you actually preserve something by protecting only its physical form? Or does preservation without continued living culture just create beautiful mausoleums, corpses in expensive clothes that we parade around for tourists? The plaza still stands magnificent at Fifth Avenue and Central Park South. The chandeliers still sparkle. Tourists still photograph the facade. The famous address still attracts guests willing to pay premium rates. But something essential was extracted during those years of systematic destruction. Whether it can ever be restored remains an open question. Because here's what really haunts me about this story. Trump didn't demolish the plaza. He didn't tear down the walls or destroy the landmark spaces. He did something far more insidious. He proved you can kill an institution while leaving the facade perfectly intact. He showed that the most devastating destruction is the kind that preserves the facade while hollowing out everything behind it. And the truly terrifying part, it worked. The model was successful. You can extract enormous value from a famous property. You can devastate the institution it represents. You can destroy communities and cultures and accumulated wisdom. You can fail, declare bankruptcy, let your creditors absorb the losses, and then you can move on to the next deal with your reputation somehow intact. The plaza survived, but survival and flourishing are very different things. So I want to know, what do you think actually died at the plaza? Was it killed, or did it simply evolve? Is what we have now, the tourist attraction, the luxury hotel in a historic building, the empty condominiums owned by billionaire ghosts, is that a tragedy or just change?
And here's the deeper question. If you had the power to reverse everything, to go back to 1988 and stop Trump's purchase, should you? Would the plaza have survived anyway, or did it need to be destroyed to be preserved? Because maybe, and this is what really keeps me up at night, maybe we can't actually save living institutions in a market economy. Maybe the best we can hope for is to save the pretty shells and tell ourselves stories about what they used to mean.
Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this kind of deep dive into how American institutions get systematically destroyed from the inside interests you, if you want to see the patterns repeated across industries and decades, hit that subscribe button because the Plaza story isn't unique. It's everywhere. And once you learn to see it, you'll never look at success the same way again. The Plaza endures. The names on the deed change every decade. The chandeliers keep burning. The building doesn't care who owns it. It just survives. More beautiful than the people who fight over it. More permanent than the fortunes made and lost inside its walls. That's the legacy of America's most famous hotel. Not the owners, the architecture, the dreams that outlived the dreamers. What really happened at the Plaza? Let me know your theory below, and subscribe. The next investigation drops soon.